It was another ordinary Tuesday morning for the delivery guy. He had been doing this job for 3 years now, hauling furniture, climbing stairs, and meeting strangers who rarely gave him more than a passing glance. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and left him enough free time to chase his real passion: photography. On weekends, he'd grab his camera and wander through the city streets, capturing moments that most people overlooked. But today, there was no time for photos. Today, he had a schedule to keep. His next stop was an address in a high-rise downtown, a sleek glass building surrounded by coffee shops and boutiques. As he pulled up in the delivery truck, he double-checked the slip of paper with the details. Apartment 7B, queen-sized bed frame. Easy enough. He grabbed his clipboard, adjusted his cap, and headed inside. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, maybe because he could already feel the weight of the box waiting for him downstairs. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, he stepped out and followed the numbers until he reached 7B. Before he even knocked, the door swung open. Standing there was someone completely unexpected. A tall woman with sharp features, piercing green eyes, and an air of quiet confidence greeted him. She wore oversized glasses perched on her nose and a loose sweater that somehow made her look both casual and elegant at the same time. For a moment, he forgot why he was there. "Hi," she said, her voice warm but firm. "You must be here for the bed." He nodded, snapping back to reality. "Yeah, that's right. Let me grab the box from the truck." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to figure something out. Then, with a small smile, she added, "Be careful. It's heavy." When he returned carrying the bulky package, she didn't just stand aside and watch like most customers did. Instead, she stepped forward, holding the door wide open and offering directions. "Just bring it over here, please. There's space near the window where we can assemble it." Her tone was polite but direct, leaving no room for confusion. He appreciated that. Too often, people acted like delivering furniture was some kind of magic trick they couldn't understand. This woman seemed different, engaged, present, almost curious about how everything worked. Assembling the bed turned out to be a 2-person job. At least that's what she insisted when she rolled up her sleeves and joined him on the floor. "I'm not letting you do all the work," she said firmly, grabbing one end of the instruction manual. They worked together, laughing occasionally when the pieces didn't quite fit or when the screws refused to cooperate. Their hands brushed, once while tightening a bolt, and though neither of them said anything, there was a flicker of awareness between them. Something unspoken, something electric. Finally, after nearly an hour, the bed stood complete. She clapped her hands softly, looking pleased. "Looks great, thanks so much for your help." "No problem," he replied, standing up and stretching his back. "It's part of the job." But then came the moment that caught him completely off guard. Leaning against the newly assembled bed frame, she crossed her arms and looked at him, thoughtfully, her lips curved into a sly smile before she spoke. "You know," she began, pausing just long enough to make him nervous. "You're exactly my type, you know that?" For a second, he thought he'd misheard her. Did she really just say that? Was she flirting? Or was this some kind of joke? His mind raced, searching for the right response. Thanks," he managed, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that filled the room. "Don't look so surprised, I mean it. Confident, hard-working, you've got all the qualities I admire." He wasn't sure what to say next. Compliments weren't exactly part of the usual delivery routine, so instead of overthinking it, he decided to play along. "Well, glad I could impress you," he joked, forcing a grin. To his surprise, she didn't let the conversation end there. Instead, she gestured toward the kitchen counter. "Hey, want some water? You look like you could use a break." He hesitated. Normally, he wouldn't accept such an offer. It wasn't professional, and he still had other deliveries to make. But something about her made him pause. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, calm yet magnetic. Or maybe it was the genuine interest in her eyes, the kind that made you feel seen in a way few people ever did. Whatever it was, he found himself nodding. "Sure, that'd be nice." She handed him a cold bottle of water, then leaned against the counter watching him drink. "So tell me," she said casually, "what do you do when you're not delivering beds?" And just like that, the floodgates opened. They talked about his love for photography, her freelance design work, their favorite books, and even their shared dislike for overly sweet coffee. By the time he finally left her apartment, he realized something strange. Despite starting the day as nothing more than a delivery guy, he was walking away feeling like he'd made a connection, one that might change everything. The delivery guy left the apartment that day with a mix of confusion and curiosity swirling in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had said he was exactly her type. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way she'd said them so matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then there was the way she'd invited him to stay for water, asked him questions, and seemed genuinely interested in his life. Most customers barely looked up from their phones while he worked. But this woman, she was different. Over the next few days, her face kept popping into his head at random moments. When he was stuck in traffic, when he was editing photos late at night, even when he was grabbing lunch alone at a diner near his route. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was nothing more than a fleeting encounter. People say things all the time without meaning much by it, right? But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. There was something about her energy, her confidence, the way she carried herself. She didn't seem like someone who wasted words or gave compliments lightly. Maybe that's why when she sent him a text message out of the blue a couple of days later, he wasn't entirely surprised. "Hey," the message read. "It's me, the bed lady. Hope you're not tired of hearing from me already." He stared at the screen for a moment, unsure how to respond. Was this normal? Did people usually exchange numbers after a furniture delivery? Part of him wanted to ignore it, chalk it up to politeness, and move on with his life. But another part, the part that had been replaying their conversation in his mind, told him to reply. "Not tired at all," he typed back. "Just surprised you remembered me." Her response came quickly. "How could I forget? You were the highlight of my week." He chuckled, shaking his head. Bold. That was one word to describe her. They started texting back and forth, not constantly, but enough to keep the connection alive. At first, the messages were light and casual. Jokes about bad coffee, comments on random things they noticed during the day. But gradually, the conversations grew deeper. She told him about her work as a graphic designer, how she loved creating visuals that told stories. He shared snippets of his photography journey, sending her a few pictures he'd taken recently. A sunset over the city skyline, a candid shot of kids playing basketball in the park. One evening, after a particularly long day of deliveries, he found himself staring at his phone, debating whether to send her a photo he'd taken earlier that week. It was a close-up of raindrops clinging to a leaf, glistening under the streetlights. He hesitated, wondering if it was too personal, too revealing. But before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. Her reply came almost instantly. "Wow, this is beautiful. You have real talent." Something about her words made his chest tighten, not in a bad way, but in a way that felt unfamiliar and new. For years, he'd kept his photography separate from his everyday life, treating it like a private hobby rather than something worth sharing. But here was this woman, someone he barely knew, looking at his work and seeing value in it. It was strange, exhilarating, and a little terrifying all at once. Their text eventually led to a phone call one rainy afternoon. He hadn't planned on it. She had simply suggested it halfway through a conversation, saying, "This would be easier if we just talked instead of typing." He agreed, though his heart raced as he dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was warm and familiar, like they'd known each other for years. They talked for over an hour, jumping from topic to topic without running out of things to say. She told him about growing up in a small town, how she'd always felt like an outsider because of her love for art and design. He shared stories about his childhood, the tight-knit community where everyone looked out for each other, and how he'd discovered photography almost by accident. By the end of the call, they both admitted they'd lost track of time. I should let you go, she said finally, her tone softening. But would it be okay if we did this again sometime? He smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Yeah, I'd like that. A week later, she invited him to meet up in person. No pressure, she added quickly. Just thought it might be fun to hang out outside of your delivery schedule. He laughed, though he couldn't deny the nervous flutter in his stomach. What exactly was this? A date? Friendship? Something else entirely? He didn't know, but he decided to go anyway. After all, what did he have to lose? They met at a cozy cafe downtown, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and shelves lined with old books. When he walked in, she was already seated at a corner table, sipping tea and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face. You made it, she said, gesturing for him to sit. I wasn't sure. If you'd show? Why wouldn't I? He asked, sliding into the chair across from her. You've got good taste in cafes. She raised an eyebrow playfully. Oh, so you're here for the coffee, not the company? He grinned. Maybe. A little of both. They spent the next few hours talking, laughing and sharing stories like old friends reconnecting after years apart. She showed him sketches she'd been working on for a new project, explaining her creative process with such enthusiasm that he couldn't help but be drawn in. In return, he pulled out his camera and showed her some of his favorite shots, pointing out details he'd noticed in each one. As the afternoon turned into evening, he realized something important. This wasn't just about attraction or curiosity anymore. There was a genuine connection between them, one that went beyond surface-level charm or fleeting interest. They challenged each other, pushed each other to think differently, and somehow managed to make even the simplest moments feel meaningful. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the streets. She walked with him to his truck, pausing before saying goodbye. I had a really nice time today, she said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We should do this again soon. He nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him, despite the cool evening air. Definitely. I'll call you. As he drove home, he couldn't stop smiling. Whatever this was between them, it felt rare and precious, a spark worth holding on to. After that first meeting at the cafe, things started to change. The delivery guy and the woman began seeing each other more often, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous. It wasn't anything official, not yet. They were still figuring out what this connection between them meant. But every time they met, it felt like another layer of understanding was added, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Their second outing was completely different from the first. Instead of a quiet cafe, she suggested they visit an art gallery downtown. I know someone who works there, she explained almost shyly. They're having a small exhibit opening tonight. I thought you might enjoy it. He hesitated for a moment. Art galleries weren't exactly his usual scene. He imagined polished floors, expensive paintings, and people sipping wine while making comments he wouldn't understand. But when he saw the excitement in her eyes, he pushed aside his doubts. Sure, he said with a grin. Why not? The gallery turned out to be smaller and cozier than he'd expected. The walls were lined with vibrant paintings, photographs, and sculptures, each piece telling its own story. As they wandered through the space, she pointed out details he might have missed. A brushstroke here, a shadow there, and shared insights about the artists behind the work. He listened intently, fascinated by how much passion she poured into explaining everything. At one point, they stopped in front of a black and white photograph of a city street at dawn. She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. This reminds me of your style, she said. It's raw, honest, like it's capturing something real. He looked at her, surprised. No one had ever compared his work to something in a gallery before. You think so? He asked, scratching the back of his neck. I do, she replied firmly. You should show your photos to more people. They deserve to be seen. Her words stayed with him long after they left the gallery. For years, he'd kept his photography tucked away, sharing it only with close friends or family. But now, standing beside someone who truly believed in his talent, he started to wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to step out of his comfort zone. Their third meeting took them to a completely different world, one that belonged to him. She had been asking questions about where he grew up, what his neighborhood was like, and he finally decided to show her instead of just telling her. On a sunny Saturday morning, he picked her up and drove her to the part of town where he'd spent most of his life. As they walked through the streets, he introduced her to the places that shaped him: the corner store where he used to buy candy as a kid, the basketball court where he played pickup games with his friends, the community center where he attended after-school programs. She soaked it all in, asking questions and listening intently, her curiosity evident in every word she spoke. "This is amazing," she said at one point, looking around. "There's so much character here, so many stories." He smiled, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. Growing up, he'd always dreamed of leaving this place, of finding success somewhere else. But now, showing it to her, he realized how much it meant to him. It was home. Later, they ended up at a local diner, sitting in a booth near the window. Over burgers and milkshakes, they talked about their families, their dreams, and the paths that had brought them to this moment. He told her about his parents, hard-working people who taught him the value of perseverance, even when life got tough. She shared stories about her own upbringing, growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone but feeling like she never quite fit in. "I've always admired people who stay grounded," she admitted, stirring her milkshake with a straw. "Even when they achieve big things, they don't lose sight of who they are. That's something I want to learn from you." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Learn from me? You're the one who knows fancy art terms and design stuff for a living." She laughed, shaking her head. "It's not about jobs or titles, it's about perspective. You see beauty in the everyday things, in raindrops on leaves, in cracked sidewalks, in moments most people overlook. That's special." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For so long, he doubted whether his passions were worth pursuing, whether anyone would care about the photos he took or the stories he tried to tell. But hearing her say these things made him realize something important. Maybe he didn't need permission from anyone else to believe in himself. Maybe all he needed was someone who saw him clearly, flaws and all, and still chose to stand beside him. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were moments when their differences became glaringly obvious, when misunderstandings crept in and tested their connection. One evening, after a long day of deliveries, he called her to vent about a frustrating customer. She listened patiently, offering advice and encouragement. But halfway through the conversation, she said something that caught him off guard. "Have you ever thought about doing something else?" she asked gently. "Something that lets you use your creativity full-time?" He froze, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, delivering furniture is great, it pays the bills, keeps you busy. But is it really what you want to do forever? You've got so much talent. Don't you think it's time to take a risk?" Her question lingered in the air, heavy and loaded. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she didn't understand the pressures of needing steady income or the sacrifices he'd made to get where he was. But deep down, he knew she wasn't trying to criticize him. She was challenging him, pushing him to dream bigger than he allowed himself to. "I'll think about it," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. And he did. Over the next few days, he found himself reflecting on her words, weighing the pros and cons of staying in his current job versus chasing something uncertain. It wasn't an easy decision, and he knew it would require sacrifices. But for the first time, he let himself imagine what it might feel like to wake up every day excited about his work, knowing he was building a future based on his passions. The time they met again, he had made up his mind, or at least he was leaning toward a choice. They went for a walk in the park, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. As they strolled side by side, he told her about his thoughts, his fears, and his hopes for the future. "I'm thinking about applying for some photography gigs," he admitted, kicking a pebble along the path. "Freelance stuff, maybe events, or portraits. Nothing huge, but enough to test the waters." She stopped walking, turning to face him with a wide smile. "That's incredible. I'm proud of you." "It's scary," he admitted, shoving his hands into his pockets. What if I fail? She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Failure's part of the process. What matters is that you try. And no matter what happens, I'll be here, cheering you on. Her confidence gave him strength, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this journey. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he could face them, as long as she was by his side. As their relationship deepened, the delivery guy and the woman began to navigate uncharted territory, not just in their personal connection, but also in how the world around them reacted. They were two people from different walks of life, and, while they didn't see their differences as a barrier, others weren't always so understanding. It started small, comments here and there that seemed harmless at first but carried an undertone of judgment. One evening, after a long day of work, he joined her at a networking event for creatives. She had invited him, eager to introduce him to some of her colleagues and show off his photography skills. He felt out of place among the polished crowd, but she reassured him with a warm smile. "You belong here," she whispered as they entered the room. At first, everything went smoothly. People admired his photos, asking thoughtful questions about his process and inspiration. But then one of her co-workers pulled her aside during a break. The delivery guy noticed the way the man glanced over at him before leaning in to whisper something in her ear. Whatever it was made her stiffen slightly, though she quickly masked it with a polite nod. Later, when they were alone, he couldn't help but ask, "What did he say to you?" She hesitated, clearly debating whether to share. Finally, she sighed. "He asked if I was sure you could keep up with my lifestyle." The words stung more than he expected. He forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Sounds like he doesn't know much about me." Her expression softened, and she reached for his hand. "Don't let it bother you. He doesn't know anything about who you are or what you're capable of." But the comment lingered in his mind, planting seeds of doubt. Was this what people thought when they saw them together? That he wasn't good enough? That their worlds were too far apart to bridge? The tension grew when they attended a family dinner at her parents' house. It was their first real introduction to her family, and he wanted to make a good impression. He dressed neatly, practiced polite conversation starters, and reminded himself to be charming. Still, no amount of preparation could have prepared him for the subtle scrutiny he faced. Her father, a retired professor with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, dominated the conversation. At first, the questions seemed innocent enough. Where did he grow up? What kind of work did he do? But soon, the tone shifted. Her dad began probing deeper, asking pointedly about his career goals and future plans. "What do you see yourself doing in 5 years?" her father asked, his gaze steady and unyielding. The delivery guy hesitated, caught off guard by the intensity of the question. "I've been working on building my photography portfolio," he replied carefully. "Eventually, I'd like to turn that into a full-time gig." Her father nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's ambitious," he said, emphasizing the word in a way that left its meaning open to interpretation. "But freelancing can be unpredictable. Have you considered something more stable?" The delivery guy clenched his fists under the table, biting back frustration. He knew the older man meant well, but the implication was clear. Delivering furniture wasn't respectable, and photography was too risky to count on. Before he could respond, she stepped in, her voice firm yet calm. "Dad, stop. He works harder than most people I know, and he's chasing his dreams. Isn't that what matters?" Her father raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her defense. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, with a reluctant shrug, he changed the subject, steering the conversation toward safer topics. After dinner, they stood outside under the cool night sky, waiting for a cab. He stared at the ground, replaying the evening in his head. "Your dad doesn't think I'm good enough for you," he muttered finally. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with determination. "My dad doesn't get to decide who's good enough for me. That's my call, and I choose you." Her words hit him like a wave, washing away some of the insecurity that had been building inside him. Still, the encounter left scars. That night, lying awake beside her, he voiced the question that had been haunting him. Are we fighting too many battles? Maybe it's easier to walk away. She looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Or maybe we're proving something important, not just to them, but to ourselves. Love isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to challenge us to make us better. Her answer stayed with him, echoing in his mind whenever doubts crept in. She was right. They were stronger together, even if the road ahead wasn't smooth. Despite the challenges, they refused to let outside opinions define their relationship. Instead, they focused on finding common ground, blending their worlds in ways that celebrated their differences. She encouraged him to pursue photography opportunities, helping him edit his portfolio and suggesting potential clients. In return, he introduced her to parts of his life she hadn't experienced before: the neighborhood festivals, the late-night basketball games, the hidden gems tucked away in corners of the city. One weekend, he took her to a youth center where he volunteered, occasionally teaching kids basic photography skills. Watching her interact with the children, laughing and encouraging them as they snapped pictures of each other, filled him with pride. "You fit in here," he told her afterward. "Like you've always belonged." She smiled, linking her arm through his. "Maybe I have, thanks to you." Their bond continued to grow, rooted in mutual respect and admiration. They learned to communicate openly, addressing misunderstandings before they escalated. When disagreements arose, and they did, they tackled them head-on, using them as opportunities to understand each other better. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about commitment, she sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at him intently. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "Out of everyone, why are you choosing me?" He paused, considering the question. "Because you make me want to be better," he admitted. "And because, for once, I feel like I don't have to prove myself to anyone. You see me for who I am." She blinked, tears pooling in her eyes. "Good. Because I feel the same way about you." In those moments of vulnerability, they found strength. A reminder that love wasn't about perfection or fitting into someone else's mold. It was about embracing imperfections, supporting each other's growth, and standing firm against the storms that tried to tear them apart. As weeks turned into months, they became a team, navigating the ups and downs of life side by side. The delivery guy began taking on freelance photography projects, slowly building a name for himself. She cheered him on every step of the way, celebrating his victories and offering comfort during setbacks. Meanwhile, she continued to inspire him with her creativity and resilience, showing him new perspectives and challenging him to dream bigger. Together, they proved that love doesn't need to conform to societal expectations. It simply needs to be authentic. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed that their connection was worth fighting for. By now, the delivery guy and the woman had settled into a rhythm. Their relationship wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was real. They were learning to navigate their differences, blending their worlds in ways that felt natural rather than forced. He introduced her to his neighborhood, showing her places that held memories from his childhood. She brought him into her creative circle, introducing him to artists, designers, and thinkers who expanded his perspective. But as much as they tried to focus on each other, the outside world kept intruding. Comments from strangers, sideways glances at restaurants, and even the occasional snide remark reminded them that not everyone understood or approved of what they had built together. Still, they refused to let those voices define them. Instead, they doubled down on their commitment to one another, proving time and again that love doesn't need validation from anyone else. One evening, after a long day of deliveries, he came, home exhausted but excited. He'd just received an email confirming his first big photography gig. A local nonprofit needed someone to document their annual fundraiser. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was a start, a chance to prove himself, in a field he loved. When he told her the news, she lit up like a Christmas tree. "This is huge," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "You've been working so hard for this. I'm so proud of you." Her enthusiasm gave him the boost he needed. For years, he doubted whether his passion for photography could ever become more than a hobby. But seeing her belief in him made him realize something important. Success isn't just about talent. It's also about having someone in your corner, cheering you on when things get tough. The night before the event, they sat together on the couch, going over his equipment and discussing the shots he planned to take. She offered tips based on her experience with design, reminding him to think about composition and lighting. "Remember," she said, handing him a notebook where she'd sketched out some ideas, "this isn't just about taking pictures. It's about telling a story." He smiled, touched by how invested she was in his journey. "You're amazing, you know that?" She shrugged playfully. "Just making sure my guy looks good out there." The next day, as he walked into the venue, camera slung over his shoulder, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The room buzzed with energy, people chatting, music playing softly in the background, tables adorned with flowers and candles. He took a deep breath, adjusted his lens, and got to work. For hours he moved through the crowd, capturing candid moments and posed portraits alike. Every click of the shutter felt like a step forward, a reminder that he was exactly where he was meant to be. By the end of the night, his feet ached and his arms felt like lead, but his heart was full. When he showed her the photos later that week, her reaction was everything he'd hoped for, and more. "These are incredible," she said, scrolling through the images on his laptop. "You've got such a gift. People are going to want to hire you left and right after seeing this." Her words stayed with him, fueling his confidence as he began reaching out to other potential clients. Slowly but surely, his portfolio grew, and so did his reputation. Friends of friends started recommending him for weddings, birthdays, and corporate events. Each new opportunity pushed him further out of his comfort zone, forcing him to adapt and grow. Meanwhile, she continued to inspire him in her own way. One weekend, she invited him to join her on a volunteer project she'd been working on, a mural painting initiative aimed at revitalizing neglected parts of the city. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he'd be any help. "I'm not an artist," he protested. "What can I contribute?" "You don't have to be Picasso to hold a paintbrush," she teased. "Besides, it'll be fun, trust me." Reluctantly, he agreed, and within minutes of arriving at the site, he realized she was right. There was something magical about transforming a blank wall into a vibrant piece of art, especially when it was done alongside others who shared the same vision. As they worked side by side, laughing and swapping stories, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. That night, covered in paint and exhausted but happy, they grabbed burgers from a food truck and sat on the curb watching the sunset. "Thanks for dragging me into this," he said, gesturing toward the nearly finished mural behind them. "I didn't know I needed something like this until today." She grinned, nudging him with her elbow. "See? Told you it'd be worth it." As their individual passions flourished, so did their connection. They learned to support each other without overshadowing one another, celebrating victories while offering comfort during setbacks. When she faced creative blockades, he encouraged her to step away and recharge. And when he struggled with self-doubt, she reminded him of all the reasons he deserved to succeed. One rainy afternoon, as they sat inside drinking tea, she looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what people will say about us?" she asked suddenly. He frowned, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not exactly what most people expect, are we? A delivery guy turned photographer, and a freelance designer. Different backgrounds, different worlds. Do you think they'll understand us?" He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Does it matter? We understand each other. That's what counts." She nodded slowly, her expression softening. "You're right. I guess I just worry sometimes that we're asking too much of the world." "We're not asking anything," he replied firmly. "We're living our lives the way we want to live them. If people can't handle that, that's their problem, not ours." Her smile returned, brighter than before. "When did you get so wise?" He laughed, squeezing her hand. Must be rubbing off from you. Their journey wasn't without challenges, of course. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of societal expectations threatened to pull them apart. But every time they faced adversity, they emerged stronger, their bond deeper than ever. They had learned to communicate openly, to listen without judgment, and to fight for each other, not against each other. One evening, as they lay in bed talking about the future, she turned to him with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Do you remember that day you delivered my bed?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "How could I forget? You called me your type and completely blindsided me." "Well," she said, propping herself up on one elbow, "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You're exactly the kind of person I want beside me, for all the ups and downs, for all the crazy twists life throws our way." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good thing, because I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. Months turned into a year, and the delivery guy's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. What started as a chance encounter, delivering a bed to a stranger, had blossomed into something extraordinary. His photography career was finally taking off, with clients seeking him out for everything from intimate family portraits to large-scale events. Each project pushed him further, sharpening his skills and expanding his confidence. But more than anything, it was her unwavering belief in him that kept him going on days when self-doubt crept in. For her part, she continued to thrive in her own world of design and creativity. Together, they created a rhythm, a balance between pursuing their individual passions while supporting each other's dreams. She often joked that they were building a masterpiece, one brushstroke and one snapshot at a time. And though the road hadn't been easy, every challenge only strengthened their bond. One crisp autumn evening, he found himself standing, backstage at a dimly lit gallery, clutching a glass of water and trying to calm his racing heart. Tonight was the opening night of his first ever photography exhibition, a collection of images he'd titled Everyday Beauty. The walls were lined with prints of rain-soaked streets, sunlit parks, candid moments of strangers laughing or lost in thought. It was his way of showing the world what he saw, the quiet magic hidden in ordinary places. She stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You ready?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He shook his head, chuckling nervously. "Not even close. What if no one likes it?" "They'll love it," she said firmly, giving his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Because it's you. Because it's real." Before he could respond, the gallery owner appeared, gesturing toward the crowd gathering outside. "Time to face them," she whispered with a wink. As he stepped onto the small stage set up near the entrance, the room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to him, and for a moment he felt frozen. But then he spotted her in the front row, smiling encouragingly, and suddenly the words came easier. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "This show is, well, it's about seeing the beauty in everyday moments, things we usually overlook. The way light hits a window, the laughter of kids playing basketball, the quiet stillness of an empty park. These are the things I've spent years capturing because they remind me of what matters most: connection, authenticity, and finding joy in the little things." The applause that followed was overwhelming. People approached him afterward, shaking his hand, complimenting his work, and asking questions about his process. He answered as best he could, but his mind kept drifting back to her. She lingered, near the edge of the crowd, watching him with pride shining in her eyes. When the crowd finally thinned, she walked over, holding out her arms for a hug. "I'm so proud of you," she murmured against his shoulder. "You did it." He pulled back, meeting her gaze. "We did it. None of this would have happened without you." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Don't give me too much credit. You're the one who worked hard for this." But he knew better. Her support, her encouragement, her belief in him, it had all played a role. Without her, he might have given up long ago. Later that night, as they strolled home under the glow of streetlights, She slipped her hand into his. Do you remember what I said that day you delivered my bed? About you being exactly my type? He nodded, grinning. How could I forget? You blindsided me with that one. Well, I meant it then and I mean it now, she said, her tone serious but warm. You're confident, hardworking, and kind. Everything I admire, and tonight just proved it. You make things happen, even when the odds are stacked against you. Her words hit him like a wave, filling him with gratitude and pride. For so long he doubted whether he deserved someone like her, someone intelligent, creative, and fearless. But now, standing beside her, he realized something important. Love isn't about perfection or matching some ideal. It's about finding someone who sees your flaws and chooses to stand by you anyway. You know, he said after a pause, you're pretty amazing yourself. I don't think I tell you that enough. She laughed softly, leaning into him. Well, maybe you should start saying it more often. I will, he promised, starting now. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of their apartment, they sat together at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reflecting on the night before. The air felt lighter somehow, as if a weight they hadn't even realized they were carrying had finally lifted. So, what's next for you? She asked, swirling her spoon lazily in her cup. Another exhibit? Bigger projects? He shrugged, thinking, maybe. I'm not sure yet. But whatever it is, I want us to figure it out together. Her smile widened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. Deal, as long as you promise to keep surprising me. Oh, I plan to, he teased, squeezing her fingers. You ain't seen nothing yet. They laughed, the sound echoing through the cozy space. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city waking up outside, they both knew they'd built something rare and precious. Something worth fighting for. A year earlier, neither of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine. A delivery job, a bold comment, and a shared curiosity had led them to this point, to a love that defied labels and expectations. They weren't perfect, and their journey wasn't always smooth. But they had learned to embrace imperfections, to celebrate differences, and to trust that their connection was stronger than any obstacle. As they looked at each other across the table, hands intertwined, there was no need for words. They already knew this was just the beginning.